Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into the story of a lost civilization, a people who built cities straight out of the future 5,000 years ago, and then poof, they just vanished.
All right, let's just jump right in with a wild thought. What if I told you there was a city just as advanced as ancient Egypt, a place with mind-blowing urban planning and a massive trade network that thrived for centuries and then was just completely forgotten for 4,500 years? Well, this isn't some sci-fi plot. This is the real story of Mohenjo Daro.
So, how did we even find this place? Well, the story of its rediscovery isn't what you'd expect. It doesn't start in some dusty library or with a huge funded expedition. Nope. It all starts back in 1922 with an archaeologist, a deer, and a whole lot of luck. Okay, so picture this. An archaeologist named R.D. Banerjee is out hunting a deer. Suddenly, he trips on something. It's a flint scraper, but it's ancient, like 4,500 years old. That gets him looking around, and then he sees something even weirder. Locals are just taking these perfectly uniform, ancient-looking bricks from this giant mound to build their houses. He knew he'd stumbled onto something big. So he sends what he finds, including some really unique seals, to his boss, Sir John Marshall. And for Marshall, that's the aha moment. He recognizes those seals instantly. They're identical to ones found 600 kilometers away in a place called Harappa. And just like that, two random discoveries weren't so random anymore. They were part of a single, massive, lost civilization. And when I say massive, I mean the scale is just staggering. We're talking about a civilization that at its peak stretched over 1.5 million square kilometers. That's huge. It had more than 1,400 cities and towns, and get this, a population of maybe 5 million people. To put that in perspective, that's bigger than ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia combined. So what was this place they'd found? The locals called it Mohenjo Daro, which means Mound of the Dead. Kind of spooky, right? But what Banerjee and his team started to unearth wasn't just some pile of ruins. No way. This was a city that was engineered, designed with a kind of futuristic vision that is still, frankly, mind-boggling. You see, most ancient cities kind of grew messy, right? A street here, a building there, over hundreds of years. Not Mohenjo Daro. This place looks like it was built from a single master plan. Like someone designed the whole thing on a drafting table before they ever laid a single brick. And you can see that genius in the layout. The streets, perfectly straight, laid out in a grid. Important public buildings, they're up high on this raised, fortified area called the Citadel. The whole city was even built on giant platforms to protect it from floods. But the real game changer, the thing that was truly revolutionary, was what they built underground. A sophisticated, covered sewer system for the entire city. Okay, just to really hammer home how advanced this was, think about the other big names. Egypt, Mesopotamia, they had open drains, basically ditches for wastes if they had anything at all. But Mohenjo Daro, they had covered sewers made of brick with manholes so they could be cleaned out. But here's the kicker, the most amazing part, this wasn't just for the fancy palaces. Nope. Every single house was hooked up to the system. That idea of public health for everyone? That was an idea that wouldn't really catch on again for thousands of years. And right at the heart of that citadel was the crown jewel of their engineering, the Great Bath. We're talking about a huge public pool, bigger than you'd think, probably used for religious rituals. And the crazy part? It was built so well, it's so watertight that it could probably still hold water today, 5,000 years later. So what was their secret? How'd they pull that off? Well, it was this brilliant but actually pretty simple 3-step technique. Step 1, use super dense baked bricks that barely absorb water. Step 2, slap on some gypsum mortar to seal all the cracks between them. And then for the final touch, the masterstroke, a layer of natural tar, bitumen over everything. That made it totally, completely waterproof. So simple and so effective. All right, so we've seen the incredible engineering, the bricks and the drains, but a city is more than that, right? It's about the people who lived there. So what do we know about them? Well, by looking at all the stuff they left behind, we can start to get a pretty good picture of their daily lives. From what we can tell, life seems pretty good. People lived in these cool 2-story houses, often with their own private wells and bathrooms. I mean, an indoor bathroom 5,000 years ago? They were the first people in the world to grow and weave cotton. Their craftspeople were amazing, making intricate jewelry and tools. And, it wasn't all serious business. Archaeologists have found tons of toys, marbles, little carts, spinning tops. It really gives you the sense of a society where kids could just be kids.
But it all leads to a big question. Who was in charge of all this? And that's a huge mystery. We've got this one famous little statue, it's only about 6 inches tall, that everyone calls the Priest King. And yeah, he looks important, right? He's got this regal beard and a patterned robe. But here's the weird part. Unlike Egypt, there are no giant pyramids. Unlike Mesopotamia, no massive palaces for kings, no royal tombs. It's possible their whole idea of power and leadership was just completely different from anything we've seen before. Now, don't go thinking this amazing city was just sitting out there all by itself. Not at all. These people were plugged into the world. They were major players in the world's first global trade network.
It looks like their biggest trading partner was Mesopotamia. That's modern-day Iraq, which was over 2,000 kilometers away. And they weren't just trading scraps. They were sending out luxury goods, high-quality timber, ivory, and this gorgeous red gemstone called carnelian. In fact, carnelian beads from the Indus Valley have been found in the royal tombs of Mesopotamia. That's how prized their stuff was. And this is really cool. We actually have written proof from the other side of the trade route. A Mesopotamian king, Sargon of Akkad, actually wrote about these big ships docking in his city. He said they came from a place called Meluha. And because he mentions goods like timber and ivory, experts are pretty much convinced Meluha was their name for the Indus Valley. So how do you run a trade empire that big? Well, you've got to be organized. And boy, were they ever. Archaeologists have found thousands of these little cube-shaped weights, and they are perfectly standardized, all across 1,400 cities. This wasn't a loose collection of towns. This was a highly organized, centrally managed economy built on precision.
Okay, so we've got this picture of an incredible civilization, right? Advanced cities, amazing tech, a global trading empire. Which makes what happens next all the more baffling. Because around 1900 BCE, it all just starts to fall apart. The cities are abandoned, and the people seem to disappear. And the single biggest reason we can't solve this mystery is that we can't read what they wrote. Their language, the Indus script, has 419 unique symbols. And for all our technology, for all the brilliant minds who have tried, it is still a complete mystery. We have not cracked the code. And without their own words, we're just left guessing. We do have one tiny little clue, though, which is pretty clever. Researchers notice that on the seals, the symbols on the left side are often kind of squished together. You know, like when you're writing and you start running out of room on the page. That tells us they wrote from right to left. It's not much, but hey, it's a start. So back to the big question. A population of 5 million people can't just vanish into thin air. So where did they all go? For a long time, it really seemed like they did just, poof, disappear. But what really happened? Well, for a while, people thought, oh, it must have been an invasion. But the evidence just isn't there. I mean, archaeologists have only found about 37 skeletons in the entire city. That's not a massacre, right? So a big, violent end is pretty much out. The theory that makes the most sense now is a slow, gradual decline. The culprit was probably climate change. The mighty Indus River might have changed its course, drying up the farmland. And over generations, people just had to pack up and move on to survive. And that's the key. The people didn't vanish. They just blended in. They moved on, and their culture survived in incredible ways. You remember the pattern on the priest king's robe? You can still find that exact pattern in textiles made in that region today. Pottery techniques, even the shape of an axe head, it's all a direct link back 5,000 years. So while the cities crumbled, the people and their culture lived on. But here's the most mind-blowing fact of all. Everything we've talked about, all this incredible knowledge, it's based on excavating only about 10% of Mohenjo Daro. That's it. 90% of this massive, incredible city is still underground, just waiting. Which means the biggest secrets, maybe even the key to finally reading their language, are still down there, waiting to be discovered.